the Chancellor Sajid Javid has resigned suddenly in the middle of the Prime Minister's reshuffle. Boris Johnson said he wanted him to stay on, but ordered him to fire his entire team of advisers. Mr Javid refused to do that, saying no self-respecting minister could accept such a condition. He's walked out of his job just 4 weeks before he was due to deliver his first budget and was quickly replaced by his deputy at the Treasury, 39-year-old Rishi Sunak. Here's our political editor, Kuenssberg.
How tight is Number 10's grip on power? The reshuffle bill does just another day. Officials huddling to make sure it's all in order.
Hello, Chancellor.
Sajid Javid expected to keep his number 11 home. But then...
So he turned it down because the PM said he wanted him to stay, but he had to replace his whole team of advisors.
For a moment, it wasn't quite clear what was going on.
Taking an unexpected turn. I'm just turning there, Dominic Raab. What do you make of the Chancellor having to resign, Dominic Raab?
Number 10 had demanded Mr Javid sack his own team in return for keeping his job. A loss of influence he wouldn't wear.
Good afternoon.
Why do you resign, Mr Javid?
To the man who'd been the second most important person in the government, returned home to West London with a rucksack, not a red box.
The conditions that were attached was a requirement that I replace all my political advisors. These are people that have worked incredibly hard on behalf of not just the government but the whole country, done a fantastic job. I was unable to accept those conditions. I don't believe any self-respecting minister would accept such conditions, and so therefore I felt the best thing to do was to go.
Were those conditions imposed by Mr Cummings?
Those were the conditions requested by the Prime Minister. And that was, of course, his prerogative. And as I say, my successor has my full support.
So walking in his place, a rising star in Tory circles.
Are you expecting a promotion today? You're widely tipped as on the way up.
Have absolutely no idea, but
Rishi Sunak unaware first thing this morning just how high he was about to soar.
Pleasure to be part of the government.
Emerging as the brand new Chancellor. But has number 11 become an annex of the Prime Minister? Number 10A.
Do you have any power if number 10's in charge, Chancellor?
The start of the day had followed a more predictable script. While workmen were shuffling an actual cabinet around Parliament, the Prime Minister was there to do the firings before the hirings. Andrea Leadsom tight-lipped after she lost the cabinet seat she'd held for years. Esther McVeigh slipped in early to be booted out from housing. Julian Smith, who got the government in Northern Ireland back up and running, was axed.
I think that my position's up to the Prime Minister. It's his call.
We shall enjoy the nice weather that we have today.
Jacob Rees-Mogg and his chalk stripes hung on as leader of the House, along with plenty of other serving ministers. Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Northumberland MP and former Defence Minister, becomes the boss at the Department for International Development.
Looking forward to your promotion.
Oliver Dowden, the new Culture Secretary, who had been at the Cabinet Office, the government machine.
Yes, of course, thank you.
6 entrants to the Cabinet got new jobs today. But the neighbourly trouble between numbers 10 and 11 is the biggest headline of all.
This was meant to be a moderate, move along, not much to see kind of reshuffle. Not a bit of it. The departure of the Chancellor is a huge event, a huge moment for any government. But this time it represents something else. A sign of a number 10 that wants total dominance to be in complete control.
Boris Johnson's team is adamant this is no power grab, they just want less friction at the top. This is a Downing Street operation, though, that will not hesitate to clip almost anyone's wings. Kuenssberg, BBC News, Downing Street.
Tonight in his resignation letter, Mr Javid pointedly urged the Prime Minister to ensure the Treasury retained as much credibility as possible. And he said it was important that leaders had people around them who could give clear and candid advice. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, looks now at the tensions between the Prime Minister, the former Chancellor, and the challenges that await his successor.
It's only 2 days since the Prime Minister and his then Chancellor joined forces to back high-speed rail in Birmingham. Sajid Javid's job had been guaranteed, but he didn't look too comfortable as the relationship between number 10 and 11 was itself coming off the track. Partly because number 10 wants other hard-hat, high-vis, big-spend moments exactly like this, beginning at the budget in a month's time.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah.
Famously the son of a bus driver, this Chancellor never got to use his budget red box. He spoke to the BBC, though, about how a stalling economy could be boosted by spending.
You've now got this pro-business government that's investing in infrastructure, which is what businesses want to see. That's why I'm standing in a bus depot today.
But exactly how much investment is the issue. Mr Javid's new rules on borrowing have meant the Treasury having to consider tax rises to fund some of the extra spend. There is nothing abnormal about the Treasury having a tense relationship with other parts of government. It is the very job of this institution to say no, even to a Prime Minister and his aides, on issues of finance. So it's impossible not to see today's extraordinary developments in the context of number 10 asserting itself over number 11 at a time when it wants to spend and borrow more. And that raises key questions of credibility for the newly promoted Chancellor. So who is Rishi Sunak? He's just 39 years old and married to the daughter of an Indian IT billionaire. He made a fortune of his own before going into politics. He got his first job in government just 2 years ago as a junior minister before moving to the Treasury. Now he's Chancellor, in control of the nation's finances. He could now loosen the borrowing constraints he's inherited.
You look at people like the IFS, respected think.
The Prime Minister's such a fan that he chose him as stand-in in last year's noisy election TV debates.
In terms of the scales, in the scale
Nicola Sturgeon?
If I could just finish, Nick.
Nicola
on the
Sturgeon.
scale of spending, but they've also said...
The then-Chancellor shared a trip to see the new Star Wars film with his deputy and now replacement. Mr Javid did win some epic battles against top aides of the PM. Today, number 10 strikes back. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
So Julian Smith, who has been widely acclaimed for his work as Northern Ireland Secretary, was one of those who was sacked in the reshuffle. Mr Smith was appointed just 7 months ago and oversaw a monumental talks process that led to the Northern Ireland parties agreeing a deal to restore a power-sharing government at Stormont after 3 years of deadlock. He'll be replaced by the former Security Minister Brandon Lewis. This report from our Ireland correspondent Chris Page contains some flashing images.
The home of Northern Ireland's devolved government is bright and busy again. But the man who saved Stormont couldn't save his own job. Just 5 weeks ago, Julian Smith challenged politicians to bring back devolution.
We have never ignored the issues are difficult and that reaching agreement would be easy. But now is decision time.
That characteristic straight talking worked. The local parties returned to the power-sharing table. When Boris Johnson visited a few days later, he congratulated his minister.
He's done a great job and he certainly has a bright future.
But Mr Smith had differences with the Prime Minister, not least over Brexit. This morning, he was trying to hold on.
I enjoy serving the people of Northern Ireland. We've done a lot of really good stuff. There's a lot more to do.
After his sacking, there's been an unusual chorus of political praise for the former Northern Ireland Secretary. Holders of the job don't tend to be popular, but Julian Smith has generated real respect for what he's achieved here. The Stormont First Minister, Arlene Foster of the Democratic Unionist Party, said his dedication to the role was incredible. Irish nationalist politicians don't often get on with Conservatives, but they did with this one.
It's not like me to be on praising a Tory Secretary of State, but he's a good man, somebody who cared about this place and worked hard. We had our disagreements, but we were able to work well together. I think he was the best Secretary of State we've seen in a decade, actually.
And child abuse survivors thanked Mr Smith for setting up a compensation scheme they'd waited years for.
It's outrageous, actually. We're very, very angry that such a man of his integrity could be put out of his job. You know, that Northern Ireland took him upon as one of our own.
Now this man's taking charge of the Northern Ireland office. One of the many sensitive issues Brandon Lewis will face is the question of how unsolved killings from the Troubles should be investigated. Chris Page, BBC News, Belfast.
Well, let's get more now from Laura in Westminster. Let's talk about the resignation of the Chancellor. How much of a power grab by number 10 is this?
Well, Sophie, it's interesting. If a couple of weeks ago someone had told me that Sajid Javid was going to be booted out in the reshuffle, well, I wouldn't have been that surprised. There were pretty well advertised tensions between the teams at number 10 and 11. But that wasn't the expectation when the reshuffle began this morning, not at all. And the way it's unfolded has been something of a surprise. And I think that's what's really significant about this. Is this a disaster for Number 10? They just don't see it that way. Is it, on the other hand, some kind of deliberate, sinister masterstroke where they were trying deliberately to get rid of the Chancellor? Well, I don't think it was that either. Number 10 seems genuinely to have been hopeful that Sajid Javid would have said yes to this plan that would have clipped his wings, got rid of some of his advisors, but allowed him to stay on in a very top job. But he also had a sense that this might be coming. I'm told he talked about this with friends in the last couple of days, and he was pretty clear that he might have to walk. So Number 10 did not actually get their way straightforwardly in terms of deliberately showing him the door. And what I think we can take away from that is it shows today Downing Street made a political choice to put control over keeping personnel that the Prime Minister genuinely valued. Now, in the short to medium term, that might mean they have a more pliant neighbour next door, although I don't think Rishi Sunak will be anything like a pushover. It might make it easier for them to keep the promises that they've made so publicly. But it also runs the risk of creating bad blood inside the Tory party about just how this Downing Street operation is really behaving. Because decisiveness is one thing, being ruthless for the sake of it, quite another.